So we thank that group. And now we have one more group to start and to thank. These are folks who are going to talk about Ruskin as he exists now in the modern world and what the future may hold for us. We've heard lots of things along the way. Our first speaker is a dear friend, Kateri Ewing. And I'm going to tell you just a little story to begin with. I've only known Kateri 3 or 4 years, but I was on the Roycroft campus not so terribly long ago, and they have artists in residence who display their works in various shops around the Roycroft campus. And I remember walking into one shop one day, and I saw these drawings that were just so gorgeous of birds and trees and nature, and I just, whoa, what is this? Well, it happened that the person who had done these drawings was Kateri, and she happened to be there. And so I chatted with her and told her how much I loved the drawings. And I said, so how did you learn to draw so well? And she looked at me and she said, from Ruskin, of course. She is the only person I know, there may be many more, maybe some in the audience, who has taken Ruskin's book, The Elements of Drawing, and taught herself to draw using it. It's a remarkable story, and I see in Kateri the sort of future of these kinds of concerns. How do we go on with art? How do we go on with stained glass? How do we go on with great buildings like the Gamble House? And she holds in her hands, in her brushes, part of the answer to that. She is now artist in residence at the historic Roycroft campus, which Gabriel so nicely and rightly told us is over 100 years old and going strong in western New York, not far from where we live. She teaches in the studio there, and she runs an online learn how to draw kind of course here. She has thousands of students across the country who are learning to draw from Kateri and, by declension, Mr. Ruskin. She is the author of Look Closer, Draw Better, a book that has recently come out and has received raved reviews and is available at all good bookshops in this country and, of course, online. And she lives not too far from Roycroft in western New York with her sweetheart, Rick Oler, and 3 cats. Will you help me welcome Kateri Ewing?
Hello, thank you. I am really honored to be here with all of you, and what a beautiful thing to be in a room with so many thoughtful people talking about one of the greatest thinkers of all time, right? We're very lucky. Thank you to my friend Jim for his vision and for bringing us all together here, and to Steve and the Huntington and the staff here for making it such a beautiful event. I'm really honored. So my talk today, I wanted to say this is my home. This is basically my backyard, and I thought it would be nice to start with home. That's where I'm from. So my talk today is titled Learning to Draw from Ruskin, but I would like to make a small change to that. I changed it to Learning to Draw with Ruskin, because I think of my time spent with him, learning to draw with him, as a very intimate one, as if I spent it with a dear friend and teacher, like Mr. Ruskin was sitting right next to me, guiding me along my way. Someone who has been so present with me these past many years, even though we are centuries apart. But first, before I begin my story, I wanted to read this quote by Ruskin. And I am not a scholar. I'm coming here to talk to you about personal experience with Ruskin, very intimate personal experience. I'm not a scholar, so I don't always have citing for things and stuff like that. I don't know how to do that, but so my quote that I want to share with you is, your art is to be the praise of something that you love. It may only be as simple as a shell or a stone. So there's the quote again, and that's a seashell that I painted, one that my sweetheart gave to me. So obviously I've taken this quote to heart, deep in my heart actually, and I painted this seashell because I was directly inspired by this quote and by this. This is my favorite painting of John Ruskin's. And it's just a white cockle shell. But I think you'll agree with me that it has great presence in poetry. I saw this drawing at the Delaware Art Museum in March of 2018. They had a dual exhibit with Ruskin and Wyeth. That was very special, and I actually got to see this in person, which was a dream. So here are a few more of Ruskin's seashell drawings. I just wanted to show them to you because it's really obvious to me that he took his own advice to heart throughout all of his work. And I think his seashell drawings are among my favorite of all of them. So now about my story. In April of 2013, so really just 6 years ago, just about 6 years ago, a simple Google search set me on a journey that would change the course of my life. I was recently divorced. I had been recovering from cancer and 5 years of surgeries and hospital stays. I had just seen both of my children off to different parts of the world. My son was in Ukraine, and my daughter was in El Paso, Texas, to begin their lives as adults, as children do. And I was trying to find my own way, trying to find a way to earn a living, working 2 or 3 $10 an hour jobs, because I was a stay-at-home mom, and so suddenly I was forced into the workplace. So I was really feeling that empty nest syndrome. And I had far too much time on my hands. So my daughter, who had just moved to El Paso, had left a pile of her belongings on the kitchen table, like kids do, and I was to sort through them and then donate what was appropriate to Goodwill. So as I was sorting through these things and placing some of them into a box, I discovered a little set of watercolors, some brushes, an assortment of artist pencils, and a sketchbook. And I decided to keep them and give them a try. So, I have always loved to sketch and to try my hand at art, but none of my efforts had ever revealed what was in my head or in my heart. I would have this vision of what I wanted to create, but I never seemed to have the skills or patience to see them through. So I have a question for you all. How many of you draw or paint with regularity? I know you do, John. Okay, wonderful. And how many of you would love to if you didn't have to spend time learning how? If you could just wink your nose and... So, yeah. Well, that's sort of how I felt. I had always wanted to, but I continued to give up because the results of my efforts didn't match my vision or my taste in what I thought good art should be, right? I gave up too soon. There's a wonderful Ira Glass. He hosts This American Life on NPR, and he has this theory. He calls it the gap. And he says that whatever it is that we dream of doing, whether it's playing the cello or drawing or painting or cooking beautiful things, whatever it is, we want to do it because we have good taste in that area, right? We aspire to be something that we've seen in someone else. And that there's this big gap of time between when we begin to learn and when we can actually find ourselves having the skills we need to create our visions and to have our work be that even a small bit comparable to the person that we're trying to emulate or that we were inspired by. And he calls this the gap, and he says this is the time where we don't give up, that it takes time to develop the skills we need to bring forth what's in our heart and what we have as a vision, right? So I always try to keep that in mind, and I always talk to my students about that too, that we give up too soon. But something was different in the spring of 2013. I was searching for something more in my life. I had been through a rough time. I had much I wanted to say, much I wanted to discover about myself and the world around me, and creating art just suddenly felt like the way. I didn't have any big expectations for myself. I just wanted to learn and give myself something to do to occupy all my spare time. But without the financial means to enroll in art classes, I decided to teach myself. Into my Google search engine, I typed how to learn how to draw with watercolor. I clicked on the first one that looked promising, which was Top 10 Books for Learning How to Paint with Watercolor by an artist naturalist whose work looked quite elegant and appealed to my own sense of aesthetics. The very first book on her list was The Elements of Drawing by John Ruskin. Yeah, that one. So I knew a bit about John Ruskin, as I was at one time the night clerk for the Roycroft Inn, which we've heard about, the birthplace, one of the birthplaces of the arts and crafts movement in the United States. And there was a room at the inn called the Ruskin Room, and it's actually haunted. So they say. It's way upstairs, and it's used for office space and sometimes private dining. I was also familiar with Ruskin's influence on William Morris, who had a great influence on Elbert Hubbard, who we've heard about a little bit today. And Elbert Hubbard was the founder of the Roycroft. So I had always loved Ruskin's watercolor drawings. I was familiar with those too. And I thought perhaps this was the book for me. So there was a link in the blog to the Gutenberg Project. And that is a wonderful resource of literature that is in the public domain that you can download free copies. And so I did, and I sent it to my printer, and he copied me one off and spiral bound it. And I began to read and work through the exercises that Ruskin had so carefully laid out for us long ago. So over the next several months, I woke 2 hours early before I had to go to work, and I went to bed far too late so that I could spend time with Ruskin's teachings and practice my blossoming skills. Ruskin's language was beautiful. It was beautiful, even conversational in a 19th century kind of way, but the work was not easy. My first attempts were very disappointing, and at times I found Ruskin's mentoring harsh, even though his voice was intimate, like he was writing only to me, and I think others have spoken to this too. At the same time, I knew that he wasn't offering his knowledge for those who simply wanted to make pretty drawings as a way to pass time. He had stated so in his first few paragraphs. So I almost gave up. But then I tried my hand at painting a fresh spring green leaf that I had found on my morning walk. That first leaf on the left there was a bit sloppy and forlorn, and I realized that I was working way too swiftly, and I wasn't really looking at my subject. I was painting a leaf, but I wasn't painting the leaf in front of me. So I began again, and I spent days trying to paint another leaf, a dried-up lilac leaf that was left over from the previous autumn. It was dull and brown, not something most people would find beautiful or worthy of drawing, but something about it caught my eye and made my heart ache for its passing beauty. I worked on it for several days, always keeping in mind something that I had gleaned from my reading of Ruskin. The beauty is in the really seeing. When I looked closely at this tobacco brown withered leaf, the patterns and spots and subtle variations of color, the gentle turning lines of its veins were far beyond my skill level at the time. But I knew that this is what I wanted to learn, how to capture the essence of something so ordinary that a person viewing my rendering of it would perceive it as extraordinary. I found a little more success in the second leaf and was inspired enough to get back to the labor of the elements of drawing. John Ruskin had become my master. I worked through most of the exercises in my dog-eared and stained printout of this book for the next couple of years. I studied the paintings and drawings of Ruskin, mostly his careful renderings of natural history objects and botanicals, and they, along with his words, had become my greatest teacher. I am now a teacher of drawing myself. The greatest gift that has come from my art practice is being a teacher, for sure. And I share the elements of drawing in Ruskin with all of my students. Every single time I meet with a student for their first lesson, I read to them Ruskin's passage about drawing a stone, and it becomes their first assignment. The elements of drawing is also my initial recommendation on their supply list, along with a note. Read this. If you want to learn how to draw, listen to him and do the work. So this is what Ruskin says. He says, and it's actually, before he gets here, he tells you to take a walk out into your yard and to find a stone, not too light, not too dark, not too, and bring it into your house. And he tells you just how to set up your paper in the light from a northern window if possible, and to leave it there and to work on it at the same time every day so the light source is the same. He's very careful. You can't make a mistake if you listen to him. So he says, now, if you can draw that stone, you can draw anything. I mean anything that is drawable. Many things, sea foam for instance, cannot be drawn at all, only the idea of them more or less suggested. But if you can draw the stone rightly, everything within reach of art is also within yours. I mean, that almost makes me cry, because it's true. He's teaching us that if we spend the time to draw this simple stone and really get it, we can do anything, right? And it's all it is. It's just all about paying attention and learning to see. So my students and I, my new students, whenever they come, I actually have a new family starting when I get back, a father, mother, and daughter. And this is what we'll do. For 2 hours, we draw that small stone. Every single student has left the lesson with a sensitively drawn stone and feeling like learning to draw is within their reach. So that, to me, is the best first lesson possible. So here is a stone, a quite larger stone, that I drew not so long ago, a study after the great American artist Andrew Wyeth. Ruskin is not my only master these days, but through him I found other masters. Albrecht Dürer, for instance. Ruskin recommends doing something called master copies, and I don't remember if that was his exact term, but he recommends copying the works of other great artists to learn the elegance and conservation of lines and values and the process of decision-making and composition from those greatest of artists that have gone before us. And he highly recommended Dürer. He recommended the etchings of Dürer. And I did try some, and they didn't go so well. But through that I learned about silver point, which is one of my favorite ways to draw, and so I'm thankful for that. But Dürer's pretty hard act to follow. So because of this master copy practice, I also discovered the work of contemporary artist Sarah Simblett, who is a professor at the Ruskin School of Art at Oxford, and I have studied her books and her works extensively as well. She works in pen and ink, and she's my favorite. So that's Sarah's work. And Andrew Wyeth is my other greatest influence. And so there are a lot of similarities, actually, between the philosophy of Wyeth and Ruskin and their approach to art making. And the Delaware Art Museum put together a beautiful exhibition a couple of years ago. If any of you got to see it, it was remarkable. So between these four people, really, from all across time, I have found my education, my roadmap of learning for life. It is constant work to strive to put into practice what they all have to teach me. There is so much to learn. This is a pencil drawing I did of my son Christopher, inspired by what I had learned from studying Wyeth in this previous drawing. And this was sort of special. My son lives in Ukraine. He is a Russian translator, works for a big American company there, and I don't get to see him very often. So his wife sent me this picture of him. It was a photograph of him in downtown Kiev with buildings all around him. And I decided to take him out of it and almost have him disappearing and put him in the outline of the landscape of our property, like where we live. And I called it Missing You. So every good work of art holds something that was not quite knowable before its existence. Basho, the 17th century Japanese poet, wrote, "If you see for yourself, hear for yourself, and enter deeply enough the seeing and hearing, all things will speak with and through you. To learn about the pine tree," he wrote, "go to the pine tree. To learn from the bamboo, study bamboo. Unless things are seen with a fresh eye, theories are not worth writing down. And I chose this photograph because Ruskin wrote another passage, and Jim, maybe, I can't remember where it was, but it's the one about the two people going for a walk. Yes. And he talks about, maybe it is in Elements of Drawing, but he talks about a person who goes for a walk that's very busy and looking around and checking their watch and knowing that they have to get somewhere fairly soon, and they might notice their beautiful trees and a nice sunny sky, but that's about it. But then there's the person who goes for a walk who's really looking, and they notice everything. And people that walk with me complain because I'm always like backing up and looking. But these are the things we miss when we're in a hurry. Isn't that amazing? So let's revisit those leaves that I painted back in 2013. My first leaves. And I wanted to just show you a progression of what happened when I really started to pay attention to what Ruskin was teaching me. So these are Chestnut Leaves by John Ruskin. And I think you'll agree that I might never get there, but they're not just identifiable as chestnut leaves. They're not just beautiful and full of dimension and everything, but there's real presence there. There's a sense of poetry that is uncommon. And I took what I saw here and I tried to apply it to black willow leaves. And this is maybe, I still had the Roycroft mark on my work, so this is maybe a year and a half after I started to draw. And you can see where I'm influenced by this. And then a little bit later, this is a maple leaf that I found by my house, and this is maybe, it wasn't even 2 years. Really taking the time to paint an individual leaf. There is no other leaf like this leaf in the whole world, right? And I can only do that, like Ruskin says, by truly learning to see it and painting the individual and not just painting a leaf. This is a cottonwood from the road by my house that I brought home, and that's maybe 2.5 years. This is about 3 years after. Some acorns and leaves that I found, maybe cherry that I found. And these next two drawings I really love. This is just leaves that I found at the door at the Roycroft campus. And the way they were lying on the ground looked like a heart to me. And so I picked them up and brought them home. And this is a graphite drawing done on porcelain clay. And I love doing this. And it's very slow work. And so you're really taking the time to look at each individual leaf and how it's expressing itself. And then this one is a grouping of leaves I found on a walk at the creek. And this is actually, I'm sending this to Clive Wilmer for his gift for his retirement as Guildmaster of the Guild of St. George. So that's my leaves. And you can sort of see the progression that I started to understand from that first leaf where I was just painting a leaf, right? And building up. Birds are another thing that I love to paint. And Ruskin taught me a lot about seeing birds, but not so much from his own work, but just from the course of study. So this is my first bird, and you can see the date. This is April 3rd, 2013, so I had really just started. And I used my grandmother's golden book of birds, and I tried to paint the chickadee. And the head's okay, I guess, but it's not a chickadee, right? It's a stylized bird. This is my effort maybe a couple months later, where it's starting to look a little more like a chickadee. The scale is getting better, but because I'm understanding the importance of seeing instead of just painting. And then this was maybe 6 months later. So you can see the progression. I'm really starting to understand. This painting was done maybe almost 3 years ago now. So about 3 years after I started painting, and this painting is one of my favorite birds that I've ever painted. I'm very influenced by Japanese aesthetics too, and I was trying to get that balance in the white space. But this painting is called Waiting for Spring, and along with this one, which is Eastern Phoebe, you can see I'm really looking now. I'm not being a scientific illustrator, right? There's some poetry here. I'm forming the composition and all of that. But I'm really starting to try to capture the essence of my subject. And this painting and this painting are both in the Ruskin collection at Museum Sheffield. I'm very proud of that. And then this is John Ruskin's Kingfisher, which is one of my very favorite paintings of Ruskin's. And this is my trying to paint Ruskin's Kingfisher. Not exactly the same. You can see that they're, and I tried to use the materials that he would have had available to him, which is hard to find some of them. But this painting is in the collection of my friend Jim. So, yeah, and this is an eagle by Ruskin that I've tried to paint this, and I haven't been very successful with it. But this is what I learned. This is probably my finest bird drawing that I've done. And this is an American crow. And the reason I love it is not because, I mean, you can see that I gradually started getting less realistic as the bird faded out. But there's a bird there, right? I sold it, and I regret it the rest of my life. So, your art is to be the praise of something that you love. It may be only as simple, it may only be as simple as a shell or a stone. So what started as my desire to draw, and when I say draw, I mean paint as well, what started as a quest to learn, through my time spent with Ruskin, it quickly became a quest to really see. It evolved into something different, though. It evolved into being humanly aware and alive, and utterly engaged through my head, hands, and heart with the natural world around me. That is the magic. There is magic in the act of creating a drawing or painting. Where there was nothing, now there is something. Beauty has been manifested, an object of the physical world, or even our imagination has been documented through our unique way of seeing and experiencing life and all that surrounds us. It is this simple act of magic that keeps me coming back to this work with fresh eyes and new wonderment and praise. Praise is the right word. He had that absolutely right. Through drawing, my eyes and my whole self have fallen unconditionally, truly, madly, and deeply in love with the natural world. It was our Mr. Ruskin who wrote, "The excellence of an artist, as such, depends wholly on the refinement of perception. I believe that the sight is a more important thing than the drawing, and I would rather teach drawing that my students may learn to love nature than to teach the looking at nature so that they may learn how to draw." I believe that Ruskin, for me, made drawing a political act in a way too. This is precisely Ruskin's gift to us all through his teachings on the importance of seeing. Seeing so that we may draw, drawing so that we might truly see. There is a misconception sometimes that I find, not so much with people who really know a lot about Ruskin, but with people that I share Ruskin with, and then they start to study a little bit and learn more. And they feel like he was teaching us to be scientific about everything and to be exact. And that really isn't true. He didn't see art in that, in my opinion. But he believed that you have to start there. You have to start with realism. You have to start with training your eyes and your hands and your head and your heart to all work together at the same time so that you have the tools and the ability to put your vision down the way you want to, going back to that gap thing. So it's the work, it's the training of giving that eye eye-hand coordination to get it down onto paper. And if you look at a lot of Ruskin has both, we see things, but this is art. This is poetry, right? He's not being exact here. He's not being exact here. So I always like to say that to my students, that we have to do this work. We have to be exact before we can be more expressive. This is another crow I did that is obviously not a real crow, right? But it has crowness. and so we have to learn those things first before we can branch off. So as a teacher, it brings me immense joy when my students come back to me and say, the most amazing thing happened to me. I was taking a walk yesterday and all I could think of was what color I would use to paint the sky, or I'm seeing things in a totally different way. The world is totally new to me. It's amazing what I hear from people when they start to draw. And I wanted to show you the work of two of my students that have been with me for 4.5 years. So I had only been drawing not even 2 years when I started teaching. And I was terrified to teach. But then I realized that I didn't need to be an expert to share what I was passionate about, right? I just needed to show up and teach people what I was learning, and we were all excited together. And it's been wonderful. So these women have met with me every Monday for 4 years, for a long time. And this woman, Deborah Sullivan, she's a friend of mine, and when she first showed up, she said to me, I can't paint a stick figure. And everybody says that. And I looked at her and I said, why would you want to? So let's think about what you want to draw, and she hems and she haws and she never does her homework. But every now and then she puts herself to something because she loves the subject. And she really wanted to draw an elephant. This took her over 2 months of work to do this drawing. It might not take other people 2 months, but she worked really hard on this. Look at that. It's beautiful, right? Absolutely beautiful. And then this is my student Maggie, who was doing studies of Winslow Homer paintings with graphite. Pretty amazing. She had only been drawing for like 1.5 years. Yeah. It's possible for all of us. So I believe that drawing is a bridge builder too. I believe that it's a bridge builder between our solitary lives and the great encompassing of the natural world, our place within it and our imperative to protect it and preserve it and restore it. Through the intimate act of drawing the smallest of objects from the natural world, we can share our awe at being alive in the world at this moment in time, a treasure that each and every one of us can share in common. I teach group lessons at the Roycroft. I do fundraisers for them where I have like 25 people that come on a Wednesday night and we paint and drink wine, and it's really fun. And they earn a lot of money, and it's great. But what's amazing to me always is that I live in a small community, so unfortunately a lot of us know our political persuasions. And you can gather a room of people with completely diverse ideologies and bring them together with art and creation. And everything's okay, right? It's a beautiful thing. It's a bridge builder that way. And I often dream about traveling to Washington, D.C. I have this dream that I go and I meet with Congress before every session, and we draw dandelion. We get out the paints, the praying Crayola paints, and we draw dandelion lessons. And I can't help but think that they would be a more harmonious body of representatives, right? Yeah, who can be a jerk when they just painted a dandelion? I don't know. But I'm joking, but I'm really not joking. I truly believe it would help. So while drawing in this joining of eye and hand and heart, I have found an inexhaustible well of joy. True contentment, because of my own experiences as a draftsman, as a teacher of drawing, I've seen how drawing can become the great equalizer. So not only a bridge builder, but an equalizer. Our subject could be the sandal of Gandhi or the knife that you buttered your toast with. It doesn't matter. Each and everything that we take the time to draw gets the same amount of attention and love. So through drawing, we learn to see the extraordinary in the ordinary and to bring the extraordinary back down to the ordinary, right? Ruskin knew this instinctively, and I believe it's exactly why he spent so much time preaching the benefits of learning to draw, so that we might learn how to better see the truth of the world around us. When we spend hours drawing something, we spend hours learning to fall in love with it. And when we love something, we want the best for it. We want to be certain that it's cared for. I remember Sarah telling me a story. Where are you, Sarah? I remember you telling me a story about bringing your students, your literature students, a leaf to draw, and the one student who didn't want to give his back. Yeah. I mean, it's true. When we spend time with things, we learn to love them, right? Even if it's just a common leaf or a leg of a spider. I've done that, a wing of a dragonfly. I mean, it becomes an individual in your eyes when you take the time to draw it. So when we spend hours drawing something, I just read that, sorry. Yes, okay. Teaching a young child to observe nature by drawing it might be one of the best ways to ensure that he or she becomes an advocate for the natural world, for the environment. Ruskin wrote that the art of drawing, which is of more real importance to the human race than of writing, should be taught to every child, just as writing is. And in fact, many of our schools are not only eliminating art programs due to budget cuts, but when they do teach drawing, it is often in a very disconnected way. I have recent experience, not that recent, but with my children and the art program they had in different parts of their public education. And a lot of it's due to budget, you know, and it's, I don't know, I have some pretty revolutionary ideas about how to teach art to kids. So if any of you are educators, I would love to talk to you about that. I don't know where to go with it, but I just think it's a really important thing that we think about. And just the other day, one of my students told me a story. She was a teacher of anthropology and archaeology. And when she was doing like this maybe it was an osteology lab or something, and she had to teach these students very specific ways to remember bones, different kinds of bones. And I mean, to me, one bone is the next bone, right? But they had to be very specific about it. And so what she did is she brought these samples of bones in, and she thought to help them memorize that she would have them draw the bones. And these are college students. And when she gave them all pencil and paper and the bones they were to draw, and she said they scribbled little things that looked nothing like it, and they were like this big, and their papers were all crumpled up. And when she asked them, you need to take more time than this, why are you just scribbling this down? It's because they were all afraid. They were afraid that when they made a mark, someone would make fun of them because it wouldn't look like theirs, or wouldn't look as good as the teacher's, or wouldn't look like the bone they were trying to draw, because no one had ever taught them how to see something, right? And I think, I mean, how many of you here had an art education where you really learned how to see something and mark it down? I mean, so some of us, I didn't, but, you know, it's a skill. It's like learning to drive a car or riding a bike. It's a skill that we can learn, all of us. I don't think we can teach poetry. Like we might not be able to teach certain things about the artistic process. Those things have to come from within a person, and deep searching and experimenting and all of that, but we can teach anyone how to draw, right? I think it's remarkable that we don't. So I believe that the world would be a much better place if we all had the opportunity to learn how to draw. Ruskin believed this too. He believed that art was praise. He believed that being surrounded by beauty was as essential to the human spirit as air and water and nourishment from food was to our bodies. He once said, "Nothing can be beautiful which is not true? And what is learning to draw, but learning to see the truth in everything? I wanted to read one more quote from Ruskin. My presentation isn't that long. The greatest thing a human soul ever does in this world is to see something and what it saw in a plain way. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, and religion all in one. I love that. I love that. And I think one of the greatest things I learned through all this time of drawing is that it's not a precious thing, like fragile, and you've got to be so careful with it. Drawing is an elemental thing that we do to learn how to pay attention and to see the world around us in a more vital way, a more truthful way. It's a skill. It's something that we all need to do. And I hope, if nothing else, I've inspired you to check out that book. And maybe not, I told Jim, you might not want to do the whole thing, but draw the stone. Pay attention to what he says there. Read that chapter and do what he says. And if you can do that, it's all within your reach. Thank you.